mic is on. Cool. This lesson could have technically been combined with what we did in 3.3. However, that would have been a really long lesson after all of the writing that you did. And so instead, I just took the extra day and did this last little 15-minute lesson. What we're doing here is we are going in and we're talking about some terminology. This first page, lurking versus confounding, this wouldn't necessarily be something I would tell you to bring up unless they ask you to. So yes, you may do experimental design and you may be like, hey, yeah, there could be a potential confounding variable. If they don't ask about it, don't bring it up. The reason why is a lot of people will mix up what a lurking variable is and what a confounding variable is. One that we've already kind of discussed is a confounding variable. And basically what this is doing, what this is doing is it's a variable that is present in the experiment. It's tied to the explanatory variable, meaning it is doing something to affect the response. The big thing here is it's difficult to separate from the explanatory, so we don't know if it was the explanatory or confounding variable that caused the response. I like to do this with arrows. I think the best explanation of this is with our little circles and our little arrows. For explanatory variables, yes, you're trying to see, are the explanatory variables influencing our response? And for the confounding, what they do is they also influence the response. Notice that I don't have any arrows connecting the explanatory and the confounding together. That's going to be the big difference between what we see here and what we see in a lurking variable. So for confounding, it's going to cause a change in the response, but it's not going to be changing the explanatory. So let me give you an example, and then I'll kind of answer any questions you got. So I'm going in and I want to test if the fertilizer in our garden is going to make a difference. So I'm trying to see, does the fertilizer have an effect? I have a current fertilizer and I have a new fertilizer. Current fertilizer, new fertilizer. Now, using some experimental terms, my factor in this case is fertilizer type. My levels, there's two of them, current fertilizer, new fertilizer. The peppers will get, on the side that we plan to have the new fertilizer, peppers are going to get full sun, and then the other peppers for the current fertilizer are in the shade. So the way that they designed this experiment, they didn't take into consideration where the plants were planted. So all of the new fertilizer ended up in the full sun, all of the old fertilizer ended up in the shade. And so because of that, when I go in and I try to make this experiment happen and I get my results, so say for instance, the new fertilizer that's in the full sun ends up producing more peppers, I don't know what caused it. Was it actually the new fertilizer, or was it because the plants received full sun? So we can't decipher the reason why there was a response in the response variable. So is this due to the new fertilizer being better, or did the sun play a role? And we really can't tell. Now, the one thing I point out with confounding is your variables that you're considering, your factors, your explanatory variables, and then your confounding variable, they should be having an effect on the why, the response that you're getting. If they don't relate to it at all, that's when we kind of go into lurking variable territory. Now, one way that we can fix this is we can go in and we can block by sun location. Now, remember one thing, when we are blocking, it's kind of like we're going in and we're doing mini experiments. So yes, we want to test overall how well these pepper plants are going to do in the yard, but instead of looking at it as one big plot of land, we're kind of separating it into two things. We have a block where we have the old fertilizer, where we have the shade, and we have a block where we have the full sun. So this would kind of function as block 1, and this would function as block 2. Madeline, do you have a question?
I was actually just going to ask, is this what we used to block?
Yes. Yes, we will. If you know that there's going to be some outside variable that potentially could affect the response that you're getting, and it's not something where you really care to like break it into levels and try different things, you can always separate them into different blocks and then look at those blocks individually. The big thing here is, remember, we're not going to compare block to block. What you would do in these mini experiments is we would look at all of the plants in the shade and we'll see, okay, overall, which fertilizer did better. If it was the new fertilizer, great. Then separately, we look at block 2 and we see, okay, only looking at the plants that were in full sun, which fertilizer was better? Was it the old? Was it the new? If it happens to be the new again, then you can come to the conclusion that the new fertilizer is better for the plants. But if you end up getting like a split, like sometimes it's the old fertilizer, sometimes it's the new one, there's a different like variation depending on where the plant is, you can't necessarily make the claim that this fertilizer itself is better than what you are currently doing, because it needs to have certain settings where it is better. So that could be something where you list specific treatments that are helpful, but it's not a overall, if you use this new fertilizer, your pepper plants are going to double, triple, and all of that stuff. Lauren, do you have a question? No? Okay. Perfect. Many confounding variables can be controlled. We do it by blocking. You can also turn a confounding variable into a factor if you really want to, and you can create multiple levels and see what combination is going to work best. Now, for the lurking variable, this one is kind of the silly one. A lurking variable is going to be something that's present in a study where it's driving each of the two variables under investigation. So, driving each of the two variables. With this, we are going in, and it's kind of like we're saying the explanatory is affecting the response and the lurking is affecting the response, but also the lurking is affecting the explanatory. So this is kind of the new piece of information. Now, with a lurking variable, for the most part, if you read something and you ask yourself, like, they're saying that X and Y have a relationship, but they really shouldn't, it's probably a lurking variable that's causing this relationship to look like it's there. Our example is data was examined on the amount of damage to sea from a fire and the number of firefighters that responded to the fire. And a researcher concluded that the more firefighters that responded, the more damage that occurred. So what they're kind of saying is, I come in and I look at how many firefighters I have, just visually, firefighters, and then I have my amount of damage. And they're saying this is a positive relationship. As more firefighters come, they're causing more damage. The fact that there are more firefighters there means that you're going to have more damage. But there is a lurking variable in this example. What do we think the lurking variable is?
Like how intense the fire is.
How intense the fire is. So there is a lurking variable. Bless you. Size of fire. So if you have a small car fire, maybe one engine gets dispatched and they go put it out. If you have a big house fire, they're dispatching multiple stations and engines and all of that, and trucks, and they all go. So yes, more firefighters are present. However, that is not the sole cause of the damage. It's the fact that the size of the fire is so large that more firefighters have to come and more damage occurs. So a lurking variable is something that's affecting both and making it seem like there's a relationship there. Another example that we use, it's often like in the textbooks and everything, is in New York City, they sell ice cream. And in the summer in New York City, their ice cream sales go way up. But also, in the summer in New York City, their murder rates go way up. And so they decide, okay, well, since these two have a positive correlation as ice cream goes up and as murder rates go up, very clearly, if we stop selling ice cream, our murder rates should start to go down. True or false?
True. I was lying.
False. The ice cream and the murder rates have nothing to do with each other. What do we think the lurking variable is in this case? What specifically about the summer makes people uncomfortable and makes people want to eat ice cream? The heat. So the heat in New York City in the summer could potentially cause both of these variables, the explanatory and the response, to go up. So if it affects both of your variables, and again, if the relationship seems silly, it probably is a lurking variable. Yes, Madeline?
Could you use, could you come up with a different one?
Yes.
Okay.
As long as it makes sense, they will accept things that fall in line with what you're talking about. Like you can't say, like, oh, because of it's July or something like that. It has to be something related to what they're talking about. What did you have? What was your idea?
I was gonna say, like, you say, would something like this be right if I said like more tourists in the summer?
Yeah, that could work too. Yeah, so you could say, as long as you provide reasoning. So I would probably, if I were actually answering this as a full question, I would give like a because. So I think there's a lurking variable of the heat in New York City because it's hotter, therefore people buy more ice cream and therefore people get angry a lot faster in the heat. So as long as you give reasoning for these types of questions, they give you credit as long as it makes sense. Yeah.
And we would say like I think or
I believe, something like that.
Like there is.
There is, yeah.
Okay.
Because we don't know. Like
Yeah.
maybe they do have some other reason other than heat that actually causes this relationship to happen. But I believe that it is this.
Okay.
Okay, next page. Inference. So this is going to be a little bit about the differences between our observational studies and our experiments in terms of design. Big thing here, you are taking a sample and you are using it to figure out information about a population. In most cases for an observational study, your sample is randomly picked from the population, so you can use that to generalize your results to the population. In experiments, you kind of enter different territory because you can't just go out and tell somebody, hey, I picked you, you're a part of my experiment, now you have to go on a diet for 6 months. You usually in experiments are going to deal with volunteers. So there's different scopes of what we can kind of use our data to talk about. So the first one that we're going to kind of look at, they are going in and they are doing a monthly population survey. Anytime it's a survey, you're doing an observational study, and they're picking 60,000 randomly selected households. They estimate the national unemployment rate from this data. So this example is going to use random selection. To gather the individuals, they can use this data to make inferences about the larger population. So anytime you randomly select from your population, you can generalize to the entire population. Think back to like when I said, if I sample from Richardson High School, I can only use my data for Richardson High School. If I sample from all of the RISD high schools, I can't use that data to talk about North Texas high schools or Dallas high schools. If I want Dallas high schools, I need to go to different school districts, different high schools in Dallas, and sample from them. So you really have to think about who have I actually gathered data from, and that's who I can use my data to talk about. So all we can do is generalize to the sample or the population we sample from. Now, on the other hand, you have experiments. So researchers wanted to see if sleep deprivation caused a decrease in mental performance. They gathered 20 volunteers, and usually for the most part, if you read a question and you see that they're dealing with volunteers, one, if it's a survey, it's probably a bad sampling design because you don't want to use voluntary response. But for the most part, it's going to be an experiment because we are going to go in, we're going to randomly assign half to sleep deprivation and half to a regular sleep cycle. So this is going to be our experiment. Remember, the big definition for these two things that they will be looking for when you identify is, did you apply treatments? Did you not? So in observational studies, there's no treatments applied. In experiments, there are treatments. With that being said, with our experiments, we use random assignment to randomly assign the individuals to treatments. If there is a large enough difference, we can make inferences about the cause and effect. So one little note that I'm going to make here, just to kind of connect this to what we talked about last class period. In a matched pairs design, with the idea that one person is doing two treatments, I can't necessarily randomly assign them to a treatment if they have to do both of them. So in matched pairs, you are randomly assigning the order of treatment. Order of treatment. And one little clarification about that. Yes, in most cases for matched pairs, you are dealing with one person doing two things, but you can still use matched pairs if you have two people who are very, very similar to each other. Maybe you picked two high school students who have the same exact schedule. They are both girls. They both are the same age. You can use them to compare. A lot of the time, siblings can be matched pairs. Twins can be matched pairs. Sometimes they match pairs husband and wives, and they look at like sleep deprivation and they see like, does that make a difference? But you're trying to get people who are similar enough to each other in a way where your response variable can kind of see truly, is this explanatory causing this response? Well-designed experiments randomly assign. Most well-designed surveys, or all well-designed surveys, are going to randomly select from the population. Now, in a perfect world, if we go out and we're doing an experiment and we wanted to be able to generalize to the population and establish cause and effect, we would have to have both of these things present. You would have to be able to go out and randomly select from the population, and then once you have your random selection, randomly assign them to a treatment. Now, one thing you can do that happens often with like inanimate objects. Like if I want to test my pepper plants and I have a whole pepper plants field, I can randomly select 100 of them, and then I can randomly assign those 100 to a treatment of new fertilizer and old fertilizer. Now, I still will only be able to generalize it to pepper plants in my field, but I can apply it to all of them because I sampled from all of them. And because I randomly assigned them to treatments, I can then go in and establish cause and effect. So you're mostly able to do that with inanimate things. Again, kind of going into the human being side of it, I can't really go out into the world and be like, hey, now you're a part of my sleep deprivation study. You don't get to sleep tonight. Like, you can't do that to human beings, unfortunately. Or fortunately, good for humans. Yes, Madeline.
Can you block and also have groups?
Can you block and also have groups? Groups of what?
Like, so if there's already, can you have like grouping inside of different blocks?
So every single block is doing the full experiment. So if I have different treatments, like my block of pepper plants that are in the sun will get all of the treatments. My block of pepper plants that are in the shade will get all of the treatments. So you're basically doing the full experiment on each block.
And that's not grouping, right?
That's not like grouping by like, if anything, then you need to like be blocking on something else if you think you need to go further than that.
So like if we were to group them up, that would be random.
Correct. You could even block like more in depth. You can be like, I'm going to block on males who drive, males who don't drive, and then females who drive, females who don't drive. And that would still work. Yeah.
Can you group people who are in different blocks?
No.
No.
Once you're in a block, you're in a block. Like that is your group that you're never going to be compared to someone from a different block.
Okay.
Yes, Lauren.
For this match pairs, what does it mean by randomly assigned order of treatment? Like one will be there, one will be there.
So in the last lesson, we talked about the different types of experimental design. And so if I am trying to test, we did an example of music versus no music on concentration. So if I want to see, is it truly going to affect my response? Everyone from every single person is so different. Like there's so many nuances, intellect, focus levels. Do they even like classical music? Do they not? So we use you within your own block. And so we randomize what treatment you get first. So we like flip a coin, and if it's heads, you're going to do it with music first. If it's tails, you're going to do it without music first. And then you do the other treatment after a period of time.
Okay.
And then we compare your two results to each other. And then we see overall, is everyone doing better with music? Is everyone not doing better with music? Okay. And then we have basically, again, were individuals randomly assigned to groups? If they were randomly assigned to groups, that's when we can establish cause and effect. If they were not, I'm looking column-wise, if they were not randomly assigned to groups, we cannot establish cause and effect. And then looking at the rows, were individuals randomly selected? If it's a yes, then yes, you can make inferences about the population. If it's a no, no, you cannot make inferences about the population. A lot of the time in this no category, when you are saying that I dealt with volunteers, when we go into generalized experiment, this is what I'm going to kind of tie it to, experiments. We can only generalize to people. Usually I would specify to men, to women, to adults, like those in this study. So sometimes they'll ask you, can we take our results and apply them to all adults in the United States? Not really. If you're dealing with volunteers, all you can say is, I can only generalize my findings to people like those in this study because I only took data from volunteers. My data only is applicable to people like these volunteers. Now, the last page, fairly easy, nothing crazy. This is the ethics side of things that they still want us to point out to you. With having causation, yes, ideally, we get to go out in the world and establish cause and effect. However, there's some ethics behind what we do where, like the first example, does texting while driving increase the risk of having an accident? I can't put you in a car and have you text and then be like, okay, well, let's see if you get in an accident. Like, ethically, that's not a good move. The same thing goes for things where you're forcing them into a situation where people may not have the same beliefs as you, especially for things like religion and politics and all of that. I cannot force a person to go to church and then see if they happen to live longer. Most of the time in those cases, you're probably dealing with volunteers. And that one is not as bad as telling someone, hey, you're going to smoke cigarettes for 6 months and we're going to see if you get lung cancer in 6 years. Ethically, all of that, not great. The best thing that we can do to establish cause and effect in questions like this is try our best to collect a lot of data from observational studies. Now, again, at the very, very end of the day, you're not going to be able to establish cause and effect from an observational study because, again, there's all of these other factors that play into someone's day-to-day life that could cause this result. So if you collect enough data, you may be able to talk about correlation but you will not be able to talk about causation from an observational study. The other side of it is there are laws that you have to follow. There's review boards. Anything you read in an academic journal or a medical journal has been through the run-through of, is this a well-designed experiment? So if you see something and it says it was published in a medical journal, they are following those 4 elements of a well-designed experiment. They're doing control, comparison, replication, randomization. All of that is there because they have to do that in order to be published. The one thing I will kind of point out specifically, because it has kind of popped up a little bit more than it has before, knowing the term informed consent. If you are doing a experiment, you have to make sure that the person who is participating is informed of the risks that they could encounter by participating. Now, yes, there's probably things where you're like, we're just trying to see, can you figure out what flavor of Skittle this is? Like, yes, that's not something where informed consent is as necessary as something where, does smoking cause lung cancer? You have to give them the warning signs of what could potentially happen if they participate in this experiment. And a lot of the time, those volunteers you see in any of these medical studies, they're given like a huge contract of, I've read these things, I understand these things, I know that this is possible, I'm still signing up to do this experiment. So just so that the medical researchers cover all of their bases. Now, confidentiality, again, you don't want to share names in anything experiment-wise, but other than that, that is the very, very end of experimental design. Going over